Just as a disclaimer to this one, Leon goes into the story of his life and some of the darker and lighter parts of it, and he does talk about suicide attempts, self-harm, self-abuse, and mental health struggles. So make sure you're okay to listen to all that, because I understand that some of that can be quite triggering, so be warned.
Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact, and enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand.
It is our basic human right to be fucked up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Hello, occultists, and welcome back to Occultae Veritatis podcast. My name is Leon Filger.
Ood Gallifrey.
And in studio with us,
Richard Bigley.
And
Robot.
We got a great show lined up for you tonight.
That big as I get, dog.
Robot smoking weed. Got a great show for you lined up for you tonight. This episode is called Leon's Story, and I've told little bits of this story here and there throughout the last 50-some episodes.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have asked on Twitter particularly, like, oh, about this, Leon, tell us about this. And I've decided that it warrants putting up an entire episode called Leon's Story.
We're super stoked on this episode.
Yeah. So I'm going to begin it with a poem that I won an award for. It's called My Toes Touch the Floor. My toes touched the floor. It was the 10th of November, 2015, and my toes touched the floor. The rope had stretched. The expertly crafted noose was so tight around my neck that I couldn't breathe. I could have stayed there, in my garage, with my toes touching the floor. I would have died promptly, but my toes touching the floor wasn't part of the plan. I shuffled sideways toward the stepladder. It was supposed to have fallen over, but didn't. Not much went according to plan. Reaching the ladder, I climbed up to the second step. I was getting dizzy. Desperately, I fought to loosen the death knot, cursing its perfection. My vision started going gray. I was cold. I wanted to sleep. Finally, as I started floating backward into the tunnel, I was able to work 2 fingers between the rope and the back of my neck. I was only barely able to breathe. I felt like I was inhaling seawater, but I started to slowly back out of the tunnel. It took me nearly 15 minutes to cut myself down. With my neck freed, and both feet planted firmly on the floor, I contemplated making a second attempt. But in that moment, I wasn't really interested in dying. So that's the big chunk of my story here. We're going to start reactions on the poem.
I remember that night.
Yeah. I called you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely remember that night. I talked to your mom and your sister, and I talked to everyone about... Not everyone, obviously, but I remember that night.
Yeah. This is the second time I've heard it, and the detail that stuck out to me most this time is the year 2015, and it's incredible that you've went from a place like that to now in 2018. You seem much healthier and happier, and it's just shocking that only 3 years ago, you're deep enough in that hole, you know?
Yeah, and that was, I classify suicide attempts into 2 categories. One is called not pulling the trigger, and the other is called pulling the trigger. And a lot of people disagree with me on this, and I don't care. I think it's a pretty decent system.
Yeah.
So up until that point, all of my suicide attempts had been not pulling the trigger.
Right.
I mean, there was once where I took an entire bucket full of pills and woke up in my bed full of piss 2 days later, hadn't died, which is a bit of pulling the trigger. But this is the first time I ever stepped off a ladder.
Yeah.
And I remember they tell you when someone's about to kill themselves, they'll suddenly seem happy, like they've got their life in order, everything's good. And that would have been me. I remember the satisfaction as I tied this noose, and it was a perfect 13 wrap noose that was polished off with some really shiny electrical tape. And it was the most beautiful knot I had ever tied from Boy Scouts on. And standing in my bedroom, I took a picture of myself in the full-length mirror with the noose around my neck, and I was the proudest I'd ever felt of myself. Like, I've finally done something right. And I can remember stepping off the step ladder and just my fucking toes touching the floor, and it was such a feeling of defeat. It was like you couldn't even kill yourself properly, you pathetic piece of shit.
And like depression does that. Like it turns your every effort into just you criticizing yourself. And it sounded, even in that moment, it sounded like it was just shouting out to you.
Well, it's so frustrating because it wasn't even I was that bad right then. And it's never any suicidal ideation I've had from 11 years old on, and I'll get back to that. It's not so much that it's bad now. It's that if I kill myself now, I won't have to deal with this feeling again in a week or a month or in a year.
Yeah.
You know, I've never stood there ready to pull the trigger thinking I want to die right now, but rather I don't want to go through this again next time.
Yeah.
I can't go through this again.
You just can't deal.
You can't deal with it anymore. No. And it's something I'd forgiven myself for a very long time ago. You know, if I had done it, that's okay. The last time I was ever really suicidal was a couple of years ago. I had just flunked out of nursing school because I'd gotten really sick. I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I was nauseated and had stomach pains all the time, and eventually went to the ER. And less than 24 hours later, they hustled me in for emergency gallbladder surgery. So I had a 1-inch gallstone blocking my bile duct. Oof. And it had gone on to the point where they had to remove my gallbladder, the bile duct, and part of my liver.
Jesus.
Wow.
So it was a pretty significant surgery. And the morning of, which was the day after I was admitted to the ER, the surgeon came to me with the advanced directive asking me to sign it as a full code. So if your heart stops or you stop breathing on the table, they take all reasonable measures to keep you alive. And I had signed my name next to DNR, which stands for Do Not Resuscitate.
Yep.
Because I wasn't suicidal in that moment, but I thought, boy, if I died on this table, wouldn't that be convenient because I won't have to do it?
No, I've been there, actually. I've always kind of thought of it as a passive suicidality.
Yeah.
It's not so much that you want to take action on it, but it's just you almost think of it wistfully. Like, wouldn't it be nice if, like, I just kind of...
If the universe gives me that out, I'm
fade it away
it.
and...
Because you don't have to apologize for that suicide.
Yeah.
And you don't have to write it in the newspaper as he died by suicide.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time there.
Yeah. And it's... I didn't want to die, but I had made very much peace with the eventuality that I might. And I'd said my appropriate goodbyes. And I remember being on the table. I'd requested that they use propofol instead of what they were going to use as a sedative, because I've had good luck with propofol through the 20-some electroconvulsive therapy treatments I've had. And they said, yeah, we can use propofol. It's no problem.
And I think you describe it as seeing the face of God?
That's the remifentanil. I wasn't lucky enough with the surgery to start off with remifentanil.
Okay.
They start right with the propofol, which burns up your arm. It's a 10 out of 10 pain for about 5 seconds before you go under.
Oh, Jesus.
Which is not a terribly pleasing way to go under. They say, oh, fuck, you won't remember it. Bullshit, you won't. I remember it every time. It's incredibly painful.
At least it's only 5 seconds, I guess.
Only 5 seconds.
Feels like an eternity, I'm sure.
You can suffer some pretty serious things for 5 seconds.
Yeah, you can. I mean, it takes one breath. You can take a breath in and hold it, and in 5 seconds,
just give it a good scream. Hold your breath.
Yeah, clench up your
white
toes.
knuckle to bed.
Yeah. I mean, if we get to 100 patrons, I'm going to be riding the lightning for a different kind of lightning. For 5 seconds. I'm going to get a taser.
Yeah,
yeah, I'm going to get tasered. And I found
Can I be the one to tase you?
I found a
It's me.
I know somebody that owns
what
a
if we
taser.
took turns?
Yeah. Please. I only want to shit myself once that day.
That's good. I want to take you guys back a very long time. I was born in 1985. My mother was a wonderful mother. She was doting. She loved me. She hugged me when I cried. I felt nothing but unconditional love from her.
Your mom's the best.
She is the best.
Yeah.
And I had a father who loved me and hugged me and wanted nothing but the best for me when he was sober. But he wasn't sober terribly often. So I grew up with fairly frequent physical abuse. He never hit me as such, but many times he'd come into my room at night after my sister and mother had gone to bed, and he would grab my shoulders and push me down in the bed with his entire 250 pounds on top of me, just stopping me from breathing. And I would lay very quietly because I knew he would stop if I didn't complain. And ritualistically, he wouldn't. He'd get off me and stagger out of my room. And that was a fucked up sort of thing to experience as a kid. I was very deeply Christian at the time. I remember thinking, when I go to bed, should I be facing the wall because God is outside, or facing inward because God is in my house?
Oh yeah.
And I prayed, and I prayed in a way that I knew God was real. I knew with certainty that he was real, and I knew with certainty that he heard my prayers, and I knew with certainty that he loved me and would protect me. And every night, as I saw my dad's footsteps underneath my door, I thought, please God, protect me this time. And every time he wouldn't. And it occurred to me, perhaps by the time I was 8, that it's not that he was an asshole and didn't protect me, it's just that he didn't exist. So forgive me for my atheism, if you do exist, God.
You're forgiven.
Thank you.
He's certainly done a fantastic job of hiding himself for somebody that wants everybody to know him.
He has. When I was a kid, I was in Beavers, Cubs, and Scouts.
Do you think Bigfoot is God?
Possibly.
One of the things we had to do for our community service work was sweep out an underground parking garage at a high-rise condominium in Saskatoon's Broadway district.
Volunteer days.
Yeah. And I guess like our troop got paid a certain amount of money to do all this sweeping work, and that's what paid for us to go camping. Yeah. So we did all this sweeping. It was a 3-story underground garage, and we swept the whole thing. And I remember we had this red powder that we'd throw down on everything to absorb the dust so we wouldn't breathe it in, and we swept everything. And then at the end of the sweeping, the building manager said, do you guys want to see the rooftop? Take a look at downtown Saskatoon from the top of this roughly 20-story building. And of course, that's incredible. Yes, we want to do that. So he took us up in the elevator to the top floor, and we had to walk down a hallway. And at the end of the hallway, there was a locked door that he opened. And just beyond that door was a narrow sort of staircase, like a ladder almost, leading up to the rooftop. And we climbed up the ladder and opened the door. And there we were, looking out across Victoria Avenue and the traffic bridge in downtown. And it was gorgeous. And everyone there thought, this is gorgeous. And I thought, this is where my life will end.
This is a beautiful place to die.
It was, yeah. And I was 11 years old.
Oh, wow. So young.
And a few days later, I wrote a suicide note, and I made 3 copies of it, handwritten. One I left on my bed, one I left on my bicycle, and one I taped to my chest in a Ziploc bag. And I went into the building and said hi to a couple of people who were on their way out, smile on my face, knowing that finally Dad was never going to do that again. And I took the elevator up to the top floor, and I walked to the end of the hallway, and I opened the door, and it was unlocked, and I was so happy. And I climbed up the narrow ladder-like staircase, and there was a chain and a padlock stopping me from getting onto the roof. And I credit that padlock with my existence today, because at that point, when I was 11 years old, I had completely committed myself to ending my life, and I'd never been happier about anything. Flash forward to 2006.
Were you happy at the time?
I was ecstatic.
Yeah.
It was done. I was finally not going to have to worry about God not saving me anymore, because fuck God.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this into my own hands, and I'm not going to have to deal with this anymore.
Was it more of like, well, you're not doing nothing for me, so I'm going to do it myself?
I was proud of my ingenuity, honestly. Like I was so happy that I had sorted out this reason. I'd made sure to put the suicide note in a Ziploc bag so that when my chest exploded on impact with the ground, it wouldn't muddy up the note.
Yeah.
It's a pleasing thing to solve a problem very cleanly.
Yeah. It is for sure. So in 2006, when I was 20 years old...
Oh, sorry. The question that I was getting at, though, was, so 11-year-old Leon, you get up to the store, you see the padlock. What's going through your mind then?
God. You know, you didn't protect me any of those times, but how fucking dare you stop me from taking this way out? You let this happen to me, and you won't let me leave. What kind of sick fuck are you?
What's the game?
What's up with this? So anyway, 2006, 20 years old, I was at a local pub with Richard Bigley, who's in the studio with us today, and my parents. And I had been manic for a few days. Didn't know what it was at the time. I just hadn't slept in a while and didn't feel like I needed to. And we were sitting at a table at this pub, and the waitress was flirting with me. And I mean, like, really actually flirting with me. Mm-hmm. And I was so excited because no one had ever flirted with me before. Who the fuck was I? Leon Filger, and then this gorgeous waitress is flirting with me, and Richard Bigley can attest to this. Like, it was real shit going on. But someone said something that upset me, and I knocked shit over and stormed out, and that was the end of that. And I have no idea why I did it. And I got in my car, and I drove down the number 11 highway, which is the major highway in Saskatchewan between Saskatoon and Regina, on the wrong side of the road. And I was looking for a semi that I was going to head on into. And there were cars coming at me, and I would move over into the shoulder. I didn't want to hit them. I didn't want to take anyone with me. And I kept looking for that semi. And for whatever reason, on that day, there were no semis. There were semis every other day, but not that morning. And I don't know what happened after that. The next thing I knew, I was awake in a bed in the Hantelman Intensive Care Unit at Royal University Hospital, and it's the secured inpatient facility. And it was a few days before I let my mom come visit me. I wasn't sure what I had done. I knew I had tried to kill myself. I knew that I had failed yet again and was not terribly happy about that. And when my mom finally saw me after 4 days, she had said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I just don't want to hurt anymore." And so that was my second big suicide attempt. And I stayed in the hospital for 6 months. During that time, they put me on every med under the sun. At one point, I became psychotic. They'd put me on a med that didn't agree with me. And I ended up escaping. Escaping is the word for it. I think Richard Bigley can attest to that.
Mm-hmm. I remember you telling me about this, right? I think this was before we were friends.
A little bit before.
Just like a year before.
I visited you like every day while you were
every day.
There.
Yeah, I think you went out looking for me when I made my escape.
I just left my summer job and I'm just like, I gotta go, and that was it. I left work and off.
We all went looking for Leon Filger.
We all went looking for Leon Filger. Yeah.
Did you? So when you say, did you break out? Or?
I literally broke out.
Oh wow!
Yeah, they weren't watching me close enough, and I left.
And they have those units pretty locked down.
They had them locked down after that.
Of course.
I was the catalyst.
Yeah.
I mean, suicidal people are ingenuitous, or what's that word I'm looking for?
We have the ingenuity. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, when you see a sign like "Do not lick the electrical outlet," there's always one person who did something that made that sign. I guess you're the "Do not escape from mental institution" guy.
Yeah. So I was under the impression, for whatever reason, and I've never fully understood this, that I was being pursued by the Mexican federales, the Mexican federal police.
Wow.
Oh yes.
And I understand that I'm certain of all of these things. This is reality. This is exactly what it is.
No, I understand. Yes.
Yeah. So running through downtown Saskatoon wearing a hospital bathrobe and surgical booties, on my feet.
It's not a good look, Leon.
It's not a good look for me. No, and I don't know if I was wearing anything under the bathrobe, but I was wearing the bathrobe. And I remember running down 2nd Avenue, and I stopped at a local restaurant and, busted in there crazy, like literally fucking crazy in this hospital bathrobe, asking for water. And the woman who worked there was so kind as to give me a glass of water, which I drank quickly, and then continued to run down the street.
Would have been a bad time if it was a Mexican restaurant.
Would have been a really bad time. So I ended up, and I've checked since. I actually checked yesterday how to get onto the roof of this credit union building, and there's no way. There's a fire escape that gets up to the 2nd floor, and then it's probably a 12-foot jump onto the roof.
Okay.
And somehow I found myself on that roof.
What?
I don't know how I managed it. And I've stood a few times in that alley looking at that fire escape thinking, how in the flying fuck did I get up there? But I did. I made it. I climbed up onto the roof of the credit union. And
we did descend from primates. We do have some climbing ability.
We do have some climbing ability. Yeah. And I remember pedestrians walking on the street below me, and I knew that I was being pursued by the Mexican federales. And not just pursued, but when they caught me, they were going to kill me. That was it. There was they weren't capturing me, they were killing me. And there were ceramic owls that were full of gravel that they used to scare the pigeons away. And I remember lobbing them off the side of the building like shot puts onto the pedestrians below, warning them to run from the federal police who were there. And I don't know how much time elapsed, but flash forward to the second half of the memory, a city police officer arrived on the roof, and he was the Mexican federal police. I didn't think he was. He was.
In disguise?
This was the reality.
This was the reality. Yeah, this is a Mexican federal police officer who's here to kill me.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. And he looked me in the eye, and he spread his hands open in front of him to show that he had no weapons. And then he reached to his belt, pulled out his handcuffs, and threw them down on the gravel roof and said, "Look, I've got nothing." And I thought, you dumb motherfucker, you still have a gun. What the hell are you throwing? Do you think I'm fucking stupid? Like, what, really? You're going to throw down your handcuffs?
Yeah, you threw away one of the non-lethals.
Yeah, like fucking throw your stick down on the ground if you want. Like, this is ridiculous. You still have a Glock.
Yeah.
And I took 2 steps toward him, and there was a giant air conditioning duct grate, a wide, like a giant discus. And I popped the tabs off the side of it, and I threw it at him, and it skipped off the ground, and he jumped over it.
Nice.
And then he tackled the fuck out of me.
Yeah.
And I woke up a day or two later, again in the Hantelman Intensive Care Unit, in restraints. And I remember my back was covered in scabs. And I guess what happened is that he did, in fact, tackle the fuck out of me, and there's gravel on the roof, and it cut me open pretty decently.
A little bit of road rash.
A little bit of road rash.
Yeah.
And I woke up in bed, and I was bound at the legs and the arms. And
which is not a great feeling when you're in a paranoid state.
It's a shit feeling anytime.
Anytime, yeah.
But in a paranoid state, no, it's not great. And I started thrashing on the bed because I wanted loose. I still thought the federales were after me, and I'm being held captive. Like, let me the fuck out of here. And thrashing to the point where I was at some risk of dislocating my shoulders. And the nurses were sort of frantic around me. Fuck, we gotta do something about him. He's lost his shit. And after some time, a couple of nurses were holding me down, and another one I saw out of the right side of my eye walking toward me with a syringe. And I knew that syringe was a lethal injection. And I knew that they were going to execute me. And I knew that they were never going to tell my mother what happened to me. She was never going to know what happened to me.
She would have just thought you passed away.
Or disappeared.
Yeah.
And they untied one of my arms so that they could roll me over onto my side. But my knees were being pulled into hyperextension. They were very painful because they didn't undo one of my legs to roll me over.
Ouch.
And they pulled up the bathrobe or whatever that I was wearing. And I remember just seeing out of the corner of my right eye the nurse with that needle, and she plunged it into my right buttock. And I thought, that's it. I'm dead.
Here it goes.
That's the end of that. And I remember the black circle closing and being so desperate to tell my mom what happened to me. And I woke up some days later in a better state of mind on some different meds, and that was the worst it had ever been. And I'm thankful that it's never gotten that bad before, or since rather. And so I spent 6 months there, during which time I once swam across the river to get to a better psych ward at City Hospital. Richard Bigley knows the story. I left the bad psych ward, swam across the river to the good psych ward, and they were kind enough to admit me there and allow me to stay for some time.
Cool.
So I got out of that. This would have taken me to September 2006. Took a road trip with Richard Bigley to Quebec City.
Oh, good.
Which was probably ill-advised.
It was fun.
I imagine any road trip into Quebec is ill-advised.
It was a wee bit ill-advised. And that's the sickest I've ever been. And I sort of drifted from one relationship to another and one job to another and never really stuck with anything.
Yeah, I met you like right after that.
Yeah, like right after
like
that.
Right, like immediately after
like
that.
September of 2006, I think we met. Yeah. And I had been very lucky that during that hospitalization, my dad, who had been estranged from for several years, showed up when I was in the psych ward. And he didn't apologize, but he sort of opened up his arms and said, "Hey, let's try to make something of this." And I was willing. And he got me addicted to cigarettes, which was fantastic.
Cool. I definitely, I remember that.
Oh,
yeah, he was in every day with like so many cigarettes for me.
Wow.
And he was infirm at the time, like barely just out of a wheelchair. And he would come and sit with me and smoke with me all day. And that's how we got our relationship back together. And we never addressed any of the abuse, but we didn't need to. We said we loved each other and things are really great. And that
sometimes it's easier to just work forward from a new point.
It is for sure. And so I got out of the hospital in September of 2006. In March of 2007, he died.
Yeah.
He drank himself to death. All his organs were poisoned. And so mere months after finally getting a relationship back with my dad, the universe took him again, just like the universe took everything from me.
And that's the way you rationalized it, eh? Like this was God taking things away?
Yeah, it was one of those, like, this is your reward for surviving 6 months in the psych ward. I'm going to kill your dad. It's
like the Abrahamic story in the Bible. Like, I'm going to win a bet with Satan by taking all the good things away from this guy's life.
Exactly.
When did you renounce religion?
I was probably 8.
Oh.
And to be clear, like it wasn't an aha moment of this is bullshit. It was very slowly suspecting this thing and that thing that were incompatible with my reality, and eventually concluding, and I mean I was in Catholic school for 9 years, just concluding that the most reasonable explanation for all the shit that's happening to me is that no one's stopping it. And not because he's not stopping it, it's just because there's no one there.
It's just because the universe is chaos and we're all doing the best we can.
We're all doing the best we can. So my dad died in March 2007, and I continued drifting around from relationship to relationship, job to job. I got married in 2009, started dating a girl in 2008, proposed to her after a month. We stayed married for almost 7 years.
I went to that wedding.
You did go to that wedding. It was a decent wedding.
Yeah, it was a beautiful wedding. You didn't invite me to the reception, though.
I didn't?
No.
How far back do you guys go?
2006?
2006.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
12 years.
We've been friends for a long time.
Yeah, like almost as long as I've been friends with... Because I've been friends with Richard Bigley since 2004.
Yeah.
Man, if your friendship was a kid, it'd be going to high school.
Exactly. Yeah. Like we've been friends for a long time.
Friends for a long time.
And like real, like not just peripheral,
visceral
like
friends.
Like actual friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So got married, got divorced. Then in 2014, I met a girl at work. She was actually my immediate supervisor, and fell in love with her, or thought I did. Fell in love with having sex with her because it was easy and quick.
Fell in lust with her.
Fell very hard in lust with her. Sometime into the relationship, a few months, I realized I wanted out and she wouldn't leave. And I felt the only way out of that relationship was to lose my mind and go back to the psych ward.
I remember that. I remember we talked about that. Like, we hadn't talked for a little bit, and I was working graveyard shifts with like a youth group home.
Yeah.
And we were texting at like 3 a.m, and I was like, stop, get out of that relationship.
Yeah.
Like, I remember that.
And the only way out was to go to the hospital, and that I still couldn't shake her.
Yeah.
So in 2014, I spent 6 months in the or 6 weeks rather, in the hospital, dealing primarily with depression and anxiety. And toward the end of that stay, we concluded that the depression probably wasn't going to go away on its own or with meds, and that we should try electroconvulsive therapy. So flashback to a past episode. If you haven't seen it, go listen to it right now.
It's a good one, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good episode.
Very.
So I've done now 20 electroconvulsive therapy treatments. I've got another one scheduled for January of this year, just to try to pull me through the midwinter slump. And I guess then a little more than a year ago, I met Mrs. Leon Filger, who is mentally ill herself. She suffers from depression, and we've helped each other through bouts. And I had a baby 2 weeks ago, and it's now... October 6th, 2018, and this is the healthiest I've ever been.
Yep, this is the healthiest I've ever known you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that Richard Bigley will vouch for that, too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is your year.
Yeah, it is my year. So, I mean, I guess what I want to say to everyone listening who's maybe felt my pain and knows my suffering, it gets better.
100% it gets better.
It doesn't get better all at once. It won't get better right away. But I promise that there will come a day that hurts a little bit less than yesterday did. And all you have to do is hold on. I've seen tomorrow. It's incredible. Never believe the lie that is despair, and I will do my best to believe right along with you. For Occultae Veritatis podcast, I'm Leon Filger.
Sage Murray.
Ood Gallifrey.
And in studio,
Robot.
Richard Bigley.
Good night.
Love you, bye.